Hello and welcome to the Warframe tier list. Today we'll be going over Protea, and first things first, let's go into the builds. With Protea, I have a handful of different builds, and the first one is an Ensnare build, as her second ability, Blazing Artillery, has infinite body punch through and deals increased damage every time it hits an enemy, meaning that if you use a grouping tool, this ability scales exponentially. You could also try something like Pull, as with Ensnare, you need to run overextended to get enough range. Uh, just Stretch isn't enough, and you don't want to run Stretch plus Augur Reach, as running Augur mods on your Protea can get you killed unless you go all out. The reason why is her first ability, Grenade Fan, has two different abilities attached to it. The main one you want to be using is Shield Satellites, as this is how you stay alive on her. Shield Satellites instantly reset your shield gate and can also keep you alive if you aren't running a shield gate build. And whenever your shield runs out while you have a shield satellite on you, and increases the duration of the invulnerability period from your shield gate from 1.1 seconds up to a flat 3 seconds. This is how Protea survives, and this is why it is so easy to survive on her. The problem is, if you run a single Augur mod on her, if your shield gate gets broken, instead of the 3 seconds period, you're going to be spamming abilities as Protea as a caster, and you're going to instantly press your 2, probably, maybe Ensnare, or even Grenade Fan, and you will get some shield back, and then if the enemies break it, this removes your 3 seconds of invulnerability, and it will be replaced with 0.3 seconds of invulnerability. So I do not recommend running any Augur mods on your Protea, unless you go all out and also run Brief Respite and enough Augur mods so your abilities reset your shield gate fully. Another option for auras is Protea has an issue with her sustain, where when your companion dies, is the main way you're sustaining on Protea is through the use of dispensary, dropping health and energy orbs. The health orbs are actually what's giving you the most of your sustain. You can only pick up health orbs at all times whenever your companion is alive, thanks to the use of Synth Fiber. Synth Fiber makes it so you are always allowed to pick up health orbs no matter what, even if you are full health. Your companion, later in the missions, at around 40 to 50 minute plus, starts spam dying, and you will run out of sustain if you're not careful. So what you can do is, instead of running Growing Power or Brief Respite, you can just run Combat Discipline to drain your health every time you kill an enemy. That way you can always pick up health orbs no matter what. This is what I would personally recommend. If you want to play a more tankier Protea, health-wise, you can drop Molt-Efficiency or Molt-Augmented. I would suggest Molt-Efficiency, and just replace it with Arcane Blessing. This gives you another 1200 max health that will stack up very quickly thanks to her third ability dispensary dropping all those health orbs, and then just drop Rolling Guard for adaptation, and now you should be fairly tanky with all the shields you're getting from Grenade Fan and a roughly 2k max health pool. The rest of the builds are pretty much all the same concept. Pillage is just an armor strip variant of the build. You don't need as much range, so I'm only running Stretch. Pillage does lock you into Corrosive Projection, and its sustain is a lot worse, so I do suggest running Arcane Energize on this build to help you help keep your energy topped off. This Pillage is the best build for her scaling potential, as with an armor strip, Protea can easily scale all the way up to level cap. As for the third build, this is a Nourish build to help with her sustain and to also freely spread AoE viral for you, so you don't have to worry about spreading viral yourself. There's a fourth build, which is Roar, and Roar is just very nice on Protea for a very lazy playstyle to where you don't really have to do anything other than just spam her 2 and upkeep your buffs. Protea is also one of those diverse Warframes where you can run many other Helmuth abilities, but these are the 4 I would suggest: Ensnare, Pillage, Nourish, or Roar. But again, feel free to experiment, as most things will work on her. As for the weapon loadouts, I was using a Cedo for AoE priming, and also just heat inheriting on the side, though this wasn't really the main purpose. The main purpose was just spreading viral. You could just use a normal primary weapon just to help kill, like a Brahma or any of the new Incarnate weapons that you like. Tonkor for another AoE weapon, it doesn't really matter. use whatever you want. If you just want to prime, then just use the Cedo or the Bubonico, as those are the two best primaries for priming. As for secondary, since I was using a Cedo for priming, I needed a secondary to kill Acolyte, so I was just using an Incarnate Despair with a build similar to this. Could just replace this room with a Toxin mod and also get rid of the Bane if you're only using to kill the Acolyte. It doesn't really matter, just again, same thing as the primary, use whatever you want. I would suggest, if you are not using a primer for your primary, like the Bubonico or the Cedo, to just use the Epitaph as a primer. That way you still have something to mass spread viral for your abilities to just deal increased damage. As for melee, again, use whatever you want, but though I do highly suggest the Praetos on her for the 30% parkour velocity and 20% sprint speed, as Protea has a unique role, and without the Praetos it does feel kind of slow and sluggish at times. So I would highly suggest the Praetos just to always have the parkour velocity and sprint speed. As for focus schools, it is Madurai for the 40% ability strength and 50% casting speed. Casting speed is incredibly strong on Protea. Now moving on to the rankings, we're discussing Protea in relation to 4 separate topics. Firstly, her KPM, secondly, her survivability, thirdly, her viability, and finally, how fun she is to play. All of this data sampled for a 1-hour solo Steel Path bot run with no Spectres, no on-call, and of course, no Archon Shards. Now let's go with the first topic, Protea's KPM. Protea has high KPM thanks to her second ability, Blaze Artillery, being a little aimbot turret that you can place multiple of that scales exponentially thanks to how heat procs work, and thanks to the ability dealing more damage every time it hits a target. This means that you just out of the gate have high KPM as Protea, but with certain health abilities you also have scaling potential, as with an armor strip ability you can kill enemies all the way up to level cap, and with Roar you can kill enemies in the low 1000s relatively easily. Thanks to her second ability being a little aimbot turret, you have good KPM on pretty much any tile set that you take her into, even small cluttered ones that otherwise you struggle to get good KPM on, and relative to those tiles you will still be on the upper echelon of KPM. I will give Protea a flat S rank for her KPM. Now moving on to her survivability, and her survivability is also really good thanks to her first ability, Shield Satellites, giving you all of those shields and the extra 1.7 seconds on your shield gain and vulnerability period whenever it runs out, as long as the shield satellite was on you. This means that as a shield gate frame, she is incredibly tanky, and even as a health tank, you are also very strong, as just having a strong regenerating shield that whenever it runs out gives you a 3-second vulnerability period from her shield gate is just very, very strong. A lot of people underestimate how much they benefit from shield gating, even whenever they're not actively trying to run a shield gate build and they're just running a health tank build, and on Protea it's just that much better. The only issue that Protea has in her survivability is if you're not running combat discipline and your companion dies, you can have a bit of an issue if you aren't paying attention and let yourself run out of energy. But with all of that being said, as long as you are constantly paying attention, you should have very high survivability on Protea, and I would give her an S- rank for her survivability. There's not really too much to talk about. She just has an ability that gives her an extended shield gate and just gives her a lot of shield. That's really all there is to say about her survivability. So now let's move on to the third topic, her viability. And in my opinion, Protea's viability is either average or slightly below average. The reason for this is Protea excels specifically in survival missions, and outside of survival missions, she's either maybe slightly above average to well below average. In defense missions, she could be considered slightly above average, as she's a decent nuke frame that also has that she's also giving some defense to the objective, as her shield satellites do work on most defense objectives in the game, but they don't deal enough to actually help it survive realistically. Even in base Steel Path, like, the enemies just chew through it, and defense objectives don't benefit from shield gaining, so they don't get that portion either. And outside of defense and maybe excavation and survival, like, everywhere else she's actually pretty bad compared to most other frames in the game. See, Protea does poorly in any environment where you have to be mobile, as her kit greatly encourages you to just pick a camping spot and set up a campfire and roast some hot dogs, maybe make some s'mores. And most of the missions in the game, you just can't do that. Like if you're running through a capture or an exterminate, you're just not going to have the energy to sustain to actively use her kit. And even if you drop Blind Rage for something like Streamline to have 130% efficiency, it will still be way slower running through an exterminate as Protea than just running through an exterminate as literally any other frame in the game with a weapon, or any of the other nuke or caster frames in the game. And this trickles down to pretty much every other non-endless mission as well, such as captures, spies, rescue, etc., etc. She's just not as good there as most other frames in the game. For these reasons, I will give her an average viability rank of a B, and it is carried by how strong she is in survival. Now moving on to the final topic of is she fun? And this is a bit of a cursed topic to explain, as thematically I think she is really cool, and she used to be one of my favorite frames of the game whenever she first came out, but lately, and by lately I mean the past like year and a half, every time I consider playing Protea, I'll be like, oh yeah, that sounds fun, and then I'll play her for one game, and I'm just immediately reminded of how mundane her playstyle is. Because realistically, all you're doing is you're just sitting in a corner camping, and just spamming your 2 over and over again. You're not really incentivized to do anything else either, other than maybe shoot out like a Cedo to prime the enemies, or shoot out the Epitaph to prime the enemies. Realistically, most of your gameplay as Protea, you're just sitting there spamming an ability. You may as well be watching Netflix on a second monitor or something. And she's also so strong in those settings that like you don't even have to try. Like it's fun for a bit because, you know, power fantasy reasons, but like after a while it just gets boring because you're so strong on top of her mundane playstyle on top of it. So, I don't know. In my opinion, she can be fun, but after you play her for even a little while, she just gets so boring so quickly that I can't really justify ranking her fun rank higher than a C+. In conclusion, Protea is an A- tier Warframe who is only held back by having an immobile kit, making her pretty mediocre in a lot of the different game modes. That being said, where she excels, specifically survival, she is one of the best frames in the entirety of the game.